Oh my God, are we back?
We're back. We are indeed back. Wow. And
Well,
we're
actually, I'm not though. I'm currently in Florida. Except right now, when you're watching this, it looks like I'm at home. The future is cool, kids.
you didn't even need a DeLorean for it. It's pretty impressive.
No, just actually sitting down and figuring out when we needed to record things and being adults about the situation.
It is impressive. Yes. And we actually sat down. We went, okay, we're not going to be here. What are we going to do? We're going to record early. In fact, we were recording only a few days after we recorded Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1.
Yeah.
So this is like the first time in a long time we've done it so quickly, back to back like this.
Well, and
Um,
not just that, how much can change in so many days? Enough that all the movies went off of HBO Max in the time that we went from watching the first one to needing to watch the second one, and that's really weird.
Yeah, good job to HBO Max. Halloween ended, and like the second Halloween ended, like all the horror movies came off. I think and the whole Nightmare franchise gone. I actually had it paused in my screen, and I had left. It came back and like hit play. And it was like, "Whoop, this is no longer here." I'm like, well, there you go. Okay, great.
Yeah. It's so odd, man. Yeah, I'm lucky, obviously, that I collect movies. I don't know if that's super obvious or not. I know everyone is shocked by this as a realization, but by doing that, it meant that I didn't have to panic because you immediately were like, "Hey, it's on Pluto TV," and I was like, "Yeah, but I literally have it upstairs. Like, it's fine." It's just there is something to be said about convenience in the moment when you need to watch a thing and you don't want to have to run upstairs to do that. But at
Right,
the end of the day, I could just do that. It's also one of the few times that I actually think that streaming might be better just because I don't like that they crunch 2 movies onto each one of the discs outside of the
yeah,
original in the box set. It's a cheap way to save money, and WB should be ashamed of themselves.
they should. I mean, to be completely fair, Nightmare's always been kind of a cheaper franchise anyway. They've been trying to save money from the get go, including in this one. A little toy fact here: they actually didn't recast Robert. They recasted Robert Englund as a stuntman. They kicked Robert Englund out. They weren't going to pay him his due, and they filmed like 2 weeks with a stuntman and rubber mask, and went, "Oh God, this is a mistake." Luckily, and they went back, and Robert Englund came back, and we are all lucky for it. But they have always had kind of cheap decisions during this franchise, some for the better, some for the worse. But yeah, that's the DVDs and Blu-rays are exactly that. I want a good big box set. That's what I've been waiting for. A big
Dude,
like
I've been waiting
full
for
box
Shout
set.
to get it. I don't know how it's gonna happen but I would love to see them do it because they managed to do the Friday the 13th set. They did the Halloween set,
Right?
and those sets are immaculate because they really managed to get all of the pieces in one place. And like
Yeah.
I'm still blown away that a Halloween box set actually existed like that, you
Yeah.
know?
It is phenomenal. I mean, of course, the rights are definitely an issue. We know we've already talked a lot about the Friday the 13th right, but the Nightmare on Elm Street rights are pretty messy too. It's pretty bad when Mike Flanagan, a director of Mike Flanagan's stature, has gone forward saying, "I have a great pitch for a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I just don't know who to pitch it to,"
Yeah.
and that's a problem to me.
Well, I mean, and then Blumhouse very smartly was like, "Hey, you want to do The Exorcist then?"
Yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
Because they all know that The Exorcist could use all the help it could get at this point too. I still haven't seen Believer, funny
I
enough. Like,
Me either. Me
and
either.
that's not like a dig at David Gordon Green or anything. It's just, to be honest with you, of all the franchises to not really feel like they need more, The Exorcist kind of up there for me.
Yeah.
And because really outside of the original, I can't say that I love any of them other than the third one. It's not like it's a franchise that's been putting out even like
Still the worst.
kind of good bangers. Like Friday
Yeah.
the 13th, even as bad as it is, I can go, "Oh, still kind of a banger."
Well, Friday the 13th also seemed to get more fun as it went along for a little bit, and, like, 'cause they kinda, like it went away from this, like, cheap throwaway ripoff to kinda, like, adding its own lore, and you kinda came back and, like, rewards are coming back for more. Exorcist? No. I mean, Exorcist 2 is one of the worst films in ever assembled,
Oh, it's
in my
bad.
eyes.
It's bad, bad.
3 is great. Prequels, good idea, pretty shitty execution overall, I have to say. So it's just there's not much draw to it. The first one was great. Third one, good. Rest, eh. And it feels like it's derivative at this point. Like, for actually, just like, what else can you tell story-wise? It feels like it's the same thing over and over again. Okay. So it's a
I
demon,
did
they get
I
possessed.
did like the TV show.
I never saw that, so I can't talk about that.
I think you'd like the show. And the show was like the actual good version of doing a legacy sequel to this franchise.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how much you know about it, but you're introduced to a family and all this stuff is happening to this family and it turns out that it's actually Reagan as an adult,
Gotcha. That's kind of a cool
but she's
idea.
yeah, like but she's been trying to like move forward with her life and stuff like
Right.
that. It's actually that first season was really good and I thought season 2 was good too. Not as good, but it was still very good and John Cho was the lead of season 2.
Oh, okay, interesting. I'm sure
Yeah.
check that out some point. That's for sure. I mean, I will
I think
say
they're
I
both like
trust
10
Mike Flanagan.
episodes too.
I trust Mike Flanagan though, so like I'll definitely go see his
Exactly.
film because like I think if anybody can put forth a good film or good idea, it's going to be him. So I
Did you
guess I'm
see
going to
that
watch The Exorcist.
that recent quote from him where he says he thinks it's the scariest movie he's ever written?
I did see that. I did see that. That's pretty. That's setting a high bar for me at this
It
point.
is. And it's interesting because he's not the kind of guy who normally talks like that about
Right.
his projects. So that actually made me that much more excited just because he's not a guy who tends to hype himself up like that.
Yeah, he actually tends to play down the horror aspects. He's in like horror films, but he tends to say, "Well, this isn't really a horror. It's kind of there's some spooky moments, but it's more character driven and everything." He doesn't really come out and say this is scary. He came out and said this is
Right.
he wants to write this to be the scariest thing he's ever done, and he thinks he has. That's impressive to me.
I 100% agree. So it's got me really cautiously optimistic for it.
Yeah,
Just because I really would love to see a really great Exorcist film again. It's been 50 years, like it,
yeah,
or 30 to 40, depending on who you want to ask,
right.
like
True,
because I don't
true.
think outside of me, no one's gonna go to bat for Exorcist the beginning, the Rennie Harlan prequel, and a lot of people aren't gonna go to bat for Dominion, which is the other version of that prequel.
They were both fine. I kind of
Yeah,
struggled through them. I can't say they're like awful, but I just didn't really care. I just got to the point where,
yeah,
like you got like a decent cast, and it still felt like a slog to get through. But
yeah.
eh,
No,
I'll
it's
say,
just
yeah,
kind of weird, right?
yeah.
And so that's why I'm with you, where it's like, imagine this guy who is now doing Exorcist and just, let's pretend that we have both seen it and it actually is as great as it sounds because it's Mike
Mm,
Flanagan
right.
and you don't just give him Nightmare at that point.
That's actually my hope. I'm hoping that they like it's a huge success, and somebody's like, you know what? Let's just give him Nightmare. He's made this over the reaction to it. Let's just do it already. Um, Of course, we know, as we know, we've said this before. We said this last week. The biggest hurdle for all this is going to be recasting Freddie Robert Englund because he's so iconically that character. I'm not saying it can't be done, but that's a big hurdle to get over in some
I
people's eyes.
I have to assume that Flanagan already has an idea of who he would go for.
I would think so too. I would think so
You know what I
too.
mean? And
Yeah,
I wonder if it's anyone that we have seen him work with before
one of the
because he
Flana
kind of
friends
yeah, because I was gonna say he has his, little he's
crew.
got his little crew of people that he likes to
Yeah,
work with. Like he could really just reach in the hand of the cookie jar and pull it out, and I'm sure he'd
absolutely.
find something like Roll Coley. Imagine
Yeah,
Roll Coley.
I think that could work potentially if it's done right. He's a brilliant actor. Yeah, I don't. That's this would be a stretch for him. I think. Like I haven't seen him go this guy kind of
Right.
character, but I don't doubt he could do it. I don't doubt he could do it.
And
But
and you could almost play it up in a different regard depending on like how you cast too.
right.
You can really change up the why he was murdered and why like you can almost Candyman it like if
Yeah.
you went that direction,
You could.
and really lean on like race relations in our country versus things like there's other ways to do it where it doesn't also come off as Freddy has to be a sex pest of some type, the thing
Right.
that we always talk about with the remake.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And it's tough. It was so much easier back in the '80s to be vague. You could be vague about that and kind of get away with it. In today's world, I feel like We know, so it's like, anyway, I have so much information at our fingertips now. It gets like leads to in real life just wanting to know everything. We want to know all the details about our characters and things like that. And it's harder to get away with that kind of vagary now. Like, so how do you do that? Maybe you get away and try to reclassify the whole thing and change them up entirely, which could be interesting to do. Definitely be a swing. It would definitely be a swing, that's for sure.
Well, talking about swings, let's go ahead and get into 1985's Freddy's Revenge, the
Yes.
second Nightmare on Elm Street film, because this is a film that takes many, many, many swings, is a
Yeah.
follow-up to the original Wes Craven classic. That was a hell of a segue, by the way.
Yes, it was actually very good. I mean, you yelled at me for doing it 16 minutes in. You're doing it 10 minutes in. So I'm
Well,
impressed with you.
look, man. It's not my fault that you set it up like that. And this is not. We're doing this kind of later at night. We're not
Yeah,
doing it
it's true.
in the morning when you and I have things to go and do after we're done. So
Right.
I don't even have a reason to like rush us into this.
It was just perfectly set up, so I got to go with it. So I'm
I
all there.
know.
I'm all there with you. It's fine.
I
It's fine.
hate you. I hate you for doing that because I like when we barb. I like when we have fun and we talk about news. And no, 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 you have to set up a perfect home run.
Well, here, that's what I do. That's just what I do. But let's get into it though. At this point, Nightmare on Elm Street Part Two, Freddy's Revenge. It's an interesting. This is a film that really I had a hard time classifying in my head because you're sandwiched by two of the greater entries in the franchise for sure, and two of the more definitive entries in the franchise. Nightmare 2 is a different beast, and it has some very, very devout followers. Absolutely. It's also got we're going to talk about it. It's definitely got a contingency base of queer fans who love this in ways that, like, I don't even possibly understand. I had to have conversations with people to help me understand it a little bit. Um, but at the same time, I don't know whether it succeeds or not. And we're going to get into it. But I think my thesis statement, I'll put it out there right away, is that I think I like this film as a standalone film, as an 80s horror possession kind of film. But I don't love it as the second entry in a Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. And to further that thesis statement, I'll also throw out there that if this was like the sixth or seventh film in the franchise, it might have worked better for me. But unfortunately, the fact that it comes right after the setting up of the iconic movie that Nightmare on Elm Street originally is, and then it go back to that a little bit more in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, it just has this weird placement in history.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of kind of issues in hindsight with where this film is in the franchise. The fact that it is following up what became an actual like classic film. There's a lot looking back at it that it actually does become kind of problematic for that reason. If you're looking at it as strictly just a Nightmare on Elm Street film. Um, but I actually postulated to you earlier when we were talking about this that one of the things that makes it interesting is that it does stand out in that
Yeah,
aspect as well. And it actually makes me wonder what a franchise like this could have been had it been more anthology like, where every entry had been a little more different in
right.
regards to how we are involved in this world. But the truth of the matter is unfortunately after that, we go directly back to a movie that is a lot more like the first. Wes Craven's back being involved. All of that makes it a little harder to make excuses for how this one's disjointed feeling is within the franchise.
Right.
And yet I still really appreciate it because there's a lot in it that is kind of fun. And I think Jack Shoulder shoots the hell out of it. I
Yeah,
think it's an incredibly well directed film. I think it's just a bummer that it ultimately comes after the original movie
right.
because you're immediately already going to be comparing it to that film.
Right.
And that's already a hard bar to pass. Uh, the truth of the matter is the title also is not really doing it any favors. The film is called Freddy's Revenge, but as far as we all are aware, Freddy had his revenge, like, and lost as far
Right.
as the first movie is concerned.
Right.
And so him going after a bunch of nameless teens in this movie that have nothing to do with like the bigger mythology
Yeah.
doesn't really like the title doesn't lend itself because
Right.
Freddy's Revenge sounds like it should be following up with Heather Langenkamp. Like
Yeah,
that's what it sounds like. It sounds like he should be going after Nancy, and that is not the film you end up with.
at all. You get Nancy's house, but that's about it. Um,
Right. You get Nancy's house and some tiebacks to his origin again.
right. And this really is, I mean, it's a lot like Halloween 3 in that way. Like you mentioned the anthology bit, and you're right, this could have been much more of an anthology type series if they went that route. And just like Halloween 4, Nightmare 3 kind of does go back more to its roots for that matter.
Right.
Um, you mentioned the director. The director did direct the hell out of it. He didn't want to direct the film at first, Jack Shatter, because he was not into horror films. He wasn't a big fan of Nightmare. And so that makes it a choice. You're like, okay, so you don't like Nightmare, you don't like horror films, but you're going to do this because it's going to put you on the map. He's a competent
Well,
director, so that works. But that kind of also throws in a question mark into the thing. Like, as far as building up the lore, building up everything else, what does that do to a franchise when the second entry is so different?
well, and it's funny too, to your point of him like not wanting to do this and not liking horror when he pretty much only became known for doing horror, and
Yeah.
his direct movie before this is the actually pretty good Alone in the Dark from the
Yeah.
80s with Jack Palance
Yep.
and Donald Pleasance, Halloween's own Donald Pleasance. So, there's a lot to that. Like the guy has a good eye for horror. He's good at building tension,
Yeah.
and I think he captures horror and like that stuff well, but it's so different. And I don't know if that's his fault or if it's more the script or how you want to look at it. The the tone and the way it just escalates in such a different way. And I think that because it feels so different, it's really hard for people to really just sit and accept it as it is because they're
Correct.
looking at it as the first film. Like that's the movie that they want and they're going to compare it to. And
Right.
it has no interest in trying to recapture that other than some like close beats story-wise.
Right. I mean, when you're looking for a sequel, you usually want to get more of the same, and a lot of sequels were more guilty of trying to repeat the formula. You know, Halloween 2 was trying to repeat the formula. Friday the 13th Part 2, uh, besides the fact that it's Jason instead of the mother, it's still trying to repeat the formula. Nightmare just is different right off the bat. You mentioned tone, and that's the biggest difference. Like Nightmare 1 was a very dark film, visually serious. Freddy was not wisecracking at anything. Just the color palette seemed all kind of dark and not hazy, but kind of dirty, lived
It
in.
feels grimy.
Grimy is a great word for it. Right from the get go, the very opening sequence, it's like, what is this? What are you going for here? You're going for this, like, it has like the nightmare, like the slash Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, the Freddy's Revenge. It looks like the straight to DVD, like kind of. And I mean that as a that's how what that's how they looked back in the day when they're straight to video, straight
Yeah.
to DVD. Um, it just comes off like this cheap, more colorful version of it, and the tone is just so far different. It just it reminded me a little bit of, like, Return of the Living Dead in terms of tone, although Return of the Living Dead was much more, I think, intentional than what this film is doing, although they do share Clue Gallagher at the same time, so that's an interesting
They
connection
do
there.
that.
So there's an interesting
Uh
connection more than that, but
yeah, it's funny because when you brought up Return of the Living Dead, I when we were talking about it a little bit earlier, I immediately was like, yeah, actually I do. I get it. But and this kind of fits that in a weird way of like because Wes Craven's not involved and a bunch of people wanted to keep making nightmare movies because it was so well beloved and became such a
right,
hit, they went on to do it without the person who became known for making the movie. Like
right.
Return of the Living Dead, its entire existence comes out of that crazy legal battle around Night of the Living Dead.
Yep,
And George A. Romero continued to make Dead films.
right.
And Return of the Living Dead, he has no involvement in it. And it is made by people who are not involved in the franchise after until that moment and decided to do their own thing. And it's always weird when a franchise kind of gets taken over like that
Mhm.
by suits instead of talent or just like a person who was tangentially involved getting involved because unless you're doing it to find ways to be like passionate about this stuff, it can go off the rails very quickly. Things that we talked about a lot with Friday the 13th, things that we talked about with Halloween. Like it's so easy to try to churn this stuff out and you end up in a situation like this. And
Right.
it makes this film in a franchise that is a little uneven already, at least in my opinion, it makes it even more of a black sheep. And
Yeah.
that's not necessarily a good thing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it just kind of lives in this limbo of it's become a cult iconic film in hindsight,
Right.
but I that's so weird when the original is the original,
Right. No,
right?
absolutely. I mean, I will say we talked about this before. I mentioned this earlier. I do think the queer film lovers who love this film have
Yes.
really kind of kept this as like a more classic. I don't know if it would still have that kind of same cult feel or cult level of success, but at a time where like it was very homosexuality in the '80s was not like it wasn't loud, wasn't out there, especially in
Yeah. I
film. You
mean, it
didn't.
was not a huge thing at that
No,
point.
it
It was
was. They
still
had
being hidden.
no representation in the media, especially. I mean, this was like this
It
is
was
Reagan
taboo.
era. AIDS was out there. This was it was a big.
Yeah.
It was
It
all
was
that was
bad.
considered gay. That was considered a gay play. It was a bad time, absolutely. And this actually showcased that representation, and that's not exactly. It's not always for the positive. There's actually some very gay hating tropes in here as well. Like for example, the ending felt like it was like saying that the the gay monster was sated because he went and kissed the girl and became a heterosexual man. That's what it kind of felt like at the end, and that's
Yeah.
a bad thing. But I guess when you are starved for representation, that they took that and went, at least I have something that I can kind of hook my teeth into. Because there's definitely, for sure, a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of overt. It's not subtextual. So I'm gonna say, oh, it's not even. It's overtly textual queer coding in this entire. I mean, I'm saying that word wrong. I said that to somebody. I'm going to say it outright. I had a conversation with Lego, who's my partner on review, and she is a queer like horror lover. She does a series on her channel about all about queer horror, everything else. I had a conversation with her because I was like, I didn't see some of it. She kind of educated me on some of what some stuff I'm saying now, and
I
we
love
had to,
this, by the way. This is how you do it, by the way. When you don't know, you go to someone you can talk to who is actually going to help you. Sir, you are an icon. Thank you.
well, I appreciate that. I think it's common sense. If I don't
I
understand
hate
something.
talking nice about Paul, too. I hope everyone knows that.
That is true. That is true. We had a great conversation about it. She was letting me know about all these different angles on things. I was like, okay, that's cool. She mentioned the ending to me, and I was like, that makes sense. I get that. We both came apart. One thing I want to throw out there right away: the actor who plays the lead character. I'm blanking on his name right
Jesse,
now. Jesse. Yeah, the actor who plays Jesse, whose name
Mark
is Mark
Patton.
Patton. Mark Patton. We both think he is actually probably top 5, top 10 final girls all time. Like he is actually a better final girl than a lot of final girls are, to be completely honest with you.
Honestly, not wrong.
That scream specifically, damn.
He is, it is so fascinating because, on the one hand, there are times in this movie that he cannot deliver a line
Yeah,
very
that's funny.
convincingly. And yet
You're
there
right.
are other times that he is so fun to watch
Right.
and like is so dialed into what the movie is that the performance sometimes kind of feels like way over here on two very extremes, but I actually like that
Yeah.
because it also creates that air of weirdness that the movie already is creating because the first film is very surreal. I kept liking it back to Phantasm, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That way where it feels very just, is it real? Is it not? This movie is so much more overtly real world without a lot of the dream scenario stuff that
Right.
the tone allows itself to be a little bit more weird in just life.
Yeah.
And
Oh
so
yeah.
the movie kind of leans in on that in a weird way, and I think his performance comes in that. He really understands what makes someone likable, and it's really great because I think his character is really underwritten, and I think it's my biggest problem with this movie also is I find none of the characters in this memorable. Like it is not like the first, and again, I hate to say it this way, but it's when you're coming off the first film,
Right.
you have a really iconic group of characters that you start to come around on, and it's really difficult to, like horror movies tend to do this thing where they have a really great first group and you just keep trying to recreate that.
Yeah, I agree.
This already feels like the fourth or fifth Xerox copy version of it.
Agreed. And you mentioned the characters not being memorable, and you're not wrong. I will say there's some good characters in there. I will say that Lisa, played by Kim Myers, who looks astonishingly like Meryl Streep at times. She's a solid actor. I think she's a solid
Yes.
performer, but I feel like she's almost in the wrong movie at times. It feels like she's not quite in the right movie at times. She would have done better in a more like, I think she feels like a Friday the 13th final girl, to be honest with you. And maybe the prop point is in some ways, she probably almost should have been the final girl in a way, because that's what it feels like the script wants to do with her sometimes. I mean, Jesse was the lead, and then all of a sudden it seems like he got pared down a little bit. And Wes Craven actually talked about that when he read the script. He said at one point that he would have gone with her being the lead and Jesse being like the secondary character in a way that Freddy's coming out of, which is an interesting pull for sure. Um, Kim would have been up to the task, but I think it ends up being a little bit off in this film for that reason. The other characters I would say they're out there. Robert Russler, who we know from Weird Science as the best friend Grady, the coach Marshall Bell. I remember him best from Total Recall, honestly. Um, he, they're both memorable, but not to the same degree that we had someone like Nancy and Johnny Depp's Glenn, and of course John Saxon. It kind of they do miss that kind of like gravitas of those kind of
Yeah, I mean,
performances.
look, even the Clue Gallagher
Yeah,
casting feels like you're trying to recreate that. Like, there's a lot of trying to recreate the sparks of the previous movie that
right,
don't quite get there. Like, we even have if I start having bad dreams, wake me up. Like, they're doing like a lot of those same beats in the same
right.
way, or the stuff going on at the high school. They try to recreate little things, but it doesn't quite work, and it actually makes it a lot harder to separate yourself from the original, and that makes me wanna call back to it, and it's done not necessarily always in the right way, and that can be a little frustrating.
Yeah. If you're gonna throw back to something, you gotta make it memorable. You gotta make it stand on its own. Do something a little bit special, more special, different. Or else it just seems like a cheap throwback. Like the very end of the film, the epilogue of the film felt to me like a very cheap version of the first film's ending with the Freddy. We thought Freddy was gone. No, he's not. He's still there. They're gonna have a drive off sequence and laugh, and then it didn't work. It didn't work for me at all. Um,
Well, it doesn't because, and I said this to you privately, I don't love the ending of the original either.
yeah,
It's the one thing that I've always felt it goes like a step too far, and because it's trying really hard to do the ambiguous ending
right,
that Halloween and Friday the 13th did.
right,
But I
absolutely.
don't think it really lands it, because
No,
I don't think that with that one, it doesn't feel as concise to the story it was telling.
right. Agreed.
And you know what I mean? Like, I know once again that we're setting up this, oh, it's a dream world, but it is it not? Like, didn't we watch him die? And the way that it's done, it doesn't just quite land. And so this one trying to do it, it almost feels like it knows it has to, and it's almost winking at the audience about it,
Yeah.
but it still doesn't land, and it feels more like it's only there because it's bookending how the movie starts with the
Yeah.
same thing
Mhm.
versus actually doing it to, surprise the audience. And I think
Right.
that's why it doesn't work because we've already seen it. It's how the movie started.
I agree, and I also would say that the whole film one of the problems I have with the film is that it tends not to really distinguish very well between the dream world and the real world. Um,
Mhm.
Nightmare 1 had its vagueness where, like, it was like, "Okay, well, I don't know what this is," but then it, like, kinda flipped and made the decision all of a sudden, "Okay, we're in the dream world. Alright, cool." This one just kinda, like, was so vague that, like, I don't know what was real and what wasn't. I never knew. I never came to the conclusion. I was like, "I think this is
Yeah.
dream world, but I don't really know. I don't so what's going on here?" I think that's a bad thing for the film. I think you have to at least make the determination of, is it a dream or is it not a dream? And then you can be vague at the first, but you gotta come to a conclusion and show, okay, this is a fantasy or dream world because of this. Something's way out of whack, and that's why this doesn't work as a real world thing. And you can't go back and forth so willy nilly, and that's part of the problem I had with the film.
I don't disagree with that. And I think that that ultimately becomes the you're right. It's like the bigger issue as you continue to watch it and you kind of just you're lost to a movie that isn't quite sure how to handle itself.
Right,
And I think that's ultimately just this movie's detriment. And it's the thing that I feel every single time that I watch it because I see all these really great pieces that don't quite come together. And I think that also goes to the rule of Freddy when he's out in the real world because they try so hard to put him into the real world for the last third of the movie. And I love this idea of him coming out of one of the kids that he is
right.
terrorizing. Like that's a great idea.
That's a
But
great way
number
to
one,
come back too. Because remember at the end of the first one, remember Nancy defeated him because she took his power away. Minus the
right.
vague ending, whatever. You have to do this, the cheap ending or whatever, like we said. But like, okay, so if you're down, what's a good way to come out? All right, so somebody literally takes residence in that house, so you possess him to get out. On paper, that works for me, and that actually feels like it's a good thing to do. It just sometimes the execution is a little wonky. It doesn't quite do what it wants to do, I think.
Right. And that's exactly the thing because it doesn't feel earned in the right way. And I tend to linking this back to things like Creed, because we've talked about this in the past. On paper, the idea of making a movie that is a sequel to Rocky, where we
Right,
find out that Apollo Creed had a bastard child
right,
out of wedlock, didn't seem like the world's best idea. But
right,
in execution, it lands. On paper, this idea actually sounds great, but on execution, it doesn't land at all because it doesn't feel like any of it is earned in any capacity. Yeah, he's in that house, but Jesse just feels like a random guy. Like, if
right,
this movie is called Freddy's Revenge, let's really link it into something. Like, let's make it that he's an ancestor of him, or, like make it something that makes more sense. And especially because this movie also has like a weird time jump, it's
right.
5 years after the original.
Yeah, that's a strange thing to me too, as well. 'Cause the things kind of shift. It does help explain the tonal differences to a degree potentially, but like it still feels a little weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, because I also don't think the movie does a great job of making it seem like people have moved on from it. Like, it's just been
Right,
forgotten. I think some of the other Nightmare films or Halloween films or whatever, I think that within their worlds, they handle the night of events a lot better than this movie seems to.
right,
Because instead, in this one, the more you think about it, the more you talk about it, it doesn't it seems like it, even though it knows it's coming off the original film,
right.
it feels like there's a part of itself that is trying to run from the original, and like you
Yeah,
feel like Nancy should be involved in some capacity, but they don't really want her involved. So they kind of write the character out in the worst way. They keep calling her crazy, which I really hate on top of everything else. I think the fact that they spend so much time saying that she was crazy and all this stuff kind of undermines the journey she went on, and it just plays into the bigger problem of the gaslighting that I feel like her character goes through. And now, arguably, I think there's something to be said about that as a construct of people continue to say that she's crazy, but this movie doesn't do a good job of that.
right. Absolutely. And it just becomes. It feels like it's more mean than. I
Yes,
mean, even meaner than the first one was to a degree. It just felt like this kid is beaten down left and right. He's like bullied as it is. His best friend. I mean, let's talk about the friendship between him and Grady. What a weird friendship. They meet. We first meet.
I
The
hate
guy's
it.
like making fun of him. He pantses him. They get like, and yet like this guy's like his best friend in the world. It's like it's a maybe that's an '80s thing, but I was a kid in the '80s and it didn't seem like that's what I did with my friends.
It,
Roughhousing,
it's
yes, but like not like that.
it's weird, right? And this makes me think of another horror franchise that we've talked about on this podcast, which is Final Destination.
Mm,
With
mm,
the way that I feel like Langenkamp's character could have so easily been the Clear Rivers character.
yeah,
And the idea that I almost feel like Final Destination is almost commenting on this by being like, she put herself in an asylum because she didn't feel safe, and she felt like the only way to protect everyone else was to be in there. Like,
Yeah.
there's a world where this movie is so much better because Nancy's in it, where when you talk about a character like the Ron Grady's of the world, where he could have actually been involved in that in a capacity where he's actually an interesting character who doesn't feel like a weird bullying friend.
Right.
Because they're trying to recreate the Johnny Depp friendship where they're kind of friends with a guy who's really off kilter, but he's actually kind of got like a heart of gold. I don't get that from Ron.
Yeah, at all, at all. If anything, I get the opposite of that. It's like he's friends with him because I don't think he has to be, or like he's almost forced
It's
to be. I
just
don't know
so that he
why.
can make fun of him, it feels like.
Yeah, it does. It feels that way as well. I love the idea of having Heather Langenkamp in this film. If they had Nancy in this film, I think it could have actually really done a good job of like of connecting the lore together, connecting the world together. Like if say like halfway through the film, we obviously him and Lisa find Nancy's diary. And that's like a little bit of a connection. All of a sudden, halfway through the film, he goes and sees her. He finds out where she is. Like, you know what? Maybe I should talk to her. The person who went nuts at this house and because of everything that went on. I'm going through the same thing. Maybe I can find her and you can talk to her. It would be a very Final Destination like thing, but it could have worked so well. And in fact, it does work very well in the next film. We do have her come back
Right.
in Nightmare 3. That's what made it work so well. It's missing here. And it feels so detached. I think that's one of the main things about this film is it feels so detached from the franchise, which goes back to my thesis statement where I like a lot of it. I like a lot of it as a standalone, but it just feels so detached from the franchise in a way.
And again, I feel like had this been moved forward in a way that, later on it had been more tied in a bigger way, it might help it. But
Right.
that is not, studios didn't do that back then, really.
No,
Like,
not at
it's
all.
not what you do now where you look at something like Fast and the Furious, where they took Tokyo Drift, which was like the redheaded stepchild in that franchise, and arguably made it one of the most integral parts of the entire thing.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
that movie actually really matters to the franchise now in a way that you never would have imagined. And who would have ever thought that someone would do something like that? Or look at Brave New World, the new Captain America movie that's coming out. You
Yeah.
have tie-ins to the Incredible Hulk that came out in 2008.
Damn. Damn. That's
Like,
so long ago.
but they're still finding a way, right?
Yeah.
So if you had actually made it a point to do that, it might have helped. But I think that you're right. I think that because it feels so detached, it really puts an easy target on this movie's back, and I would argue almost unfairly in
Yeah.
some regard, because you also know that there's people who hate this movie for a lot of the wrong reasons. Instead
Yeah.
of actually talking about their feelings on the movie, they just lean in on, well, it's not the original. It's got all these themes that I don't care for. It makes me feel uncomfortable and all these things. And I'd argue maybe the fact that you're uncomfortable should speak to maybe there's more that you need to talk about within yourself.
Yeah.
Like, sit in the uncomfort and like understand that, because this movie does do a lot of really interesting ideas and things that no one else was really doing, like unless you were Clive Barker and
Mm.
Hellraiser.
That's a great. That's a great conversation there. A great point with that. And speaking of that, remember that Kim, the Lisa actress, actually was in Hellraiser Bloodline, I believe. That's
I
a nice little
know.
connection there. So,
So random.
random
So
connection there.
random.
But, um, so let's talk about some of the other things that we had in the film. We do have, like we mentioned, obviously the relationship between him and Grady is just not the greatest. It's not very healthy. The relationship between him and Lisa is better and actually does anchor the film a little bit, but it still feels overall kind of a dud when it comes to like being an anchor for the rest of the film. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't seem to work overall like it should. And I don't know, it's because, and this might be where some of the queer codedness thing comes from, because it feels like this is the antithesis of what the film is originally trying to do. And it makes her into a bad guy at the end almost. It's not really her fault, but it kind of makes her into a bad guy towards the end. And it just, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting relationship that they have.
Yeah, it's a complicated relationship, and I think again it comes down to, I don't think all the characters are that well defined and that well
Yeah.
written.
Yeah.
Um, there's something to be said about the idea that that is a girl in high school who clearly is in puppy love with a boy who is not ready to come out to the world yet, and he just doesn't know how to say, I don't want to
Right.
be with you. And the movie actually deals with it in a couple of different ways. Like,
Mhm.
they do have it baked into the movie. I just wish that there was more for her character, and I wish, like, you take Ron out of the movie, there could have been a bigger thing about leaning on her
Right.
through what's going on. And the
Right.
whole sequence involving him falling asleep and like the attack on Ron could have been handled in such a different way if you put Lisa in the situation that I could
Right.
have been curious about. Because all the scenes involving her once all this starts is when the movie actually starts becoming more interesting in some capacity.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong though. I would also argue again, what are they trying to do? And if they are trying, if we talk about whether it's intentional, some things that are intentional or not, as far as the textual over textual kind of things go, the idea what he's making out with Kim or Lisa rather, sorry, and can't do it, freaks out for various reasons, whether it be is Freddy or whatever other reasons there would be actually, and he runs to Grady. And it's a very like erotic sequence there, also very like telling sequence. He's like on top of him pretty much right away. Like they're like
Oh no,
staying
that's
together. And,
100% yes.
right. So that's part of it in a way. So almost that is almost baked into the thing as well. But then he kills him for doing it. That makes it and then so it's almost like again that by him killing Ron like that at that point. Or Grady, sorry, Grady. His name is Grady, I think, actually, isn't it?
Ron Grady.
Ron Grady. That's what it is. That's why I keep saying Ron and Grady. Okay, so Grady killing him defeats everything you're trying to do with that. Or so it kind of like it
Well,
has
but
senses mixed
yes or no
messages.
in some capacity, I
True,
guess,
true,
because
true.
depending in the 80s, depending on how it's also looking, is then he's killing the person that is potentially tempting him
Right.
to make him look.
Yeah.
There is a way to look at it too in that capacity. Well, but it's kind of the things we've talked about with stuff like Halloween, where sometimes you look at it in hindsight, maybe the message isn't always right. And like slasher films in general, like there's a lot of people that are like, "Oh, see, these movies are actually like pro waiting to have sex until you're married and things like that." Because
Right.
it a lot of the times it's like, "Oh, the kids who do drugs and have sex are the ones who get killed."
Right.
Like you don't whether they mean to put those messages in or not, you are putting that message in
Yeah.
and it people notice and that's why it's kind of a running joke. And that's why they've worked very hard to distance themselves from that sort of thing
Yeah.
since then.
Yeah, and actually play against it sometimes as well. They sometimes like they lean on your expectancy of that trope and subvert your expectations either way. Um, yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of other little fun, like going into some specifics. There's some fun sequences in here which made me laugh, and not necessarily for the right reasons. I got to throw it out there. The bird.
Ugh, this sequence drives me nuts.
The bird possession sequence, which is so silly, so out there, and the father, the father says, "If it's that cheap bird seed you're feeding him." What?
Well, not
Cheap
just that. Then he
seed?
turns and starts saying that the kid just put a firecracker in it and he set it up and then the kid goes, you can't talk to me like that."
Right,
Only for the him to be like, walk out because yeah, I also wouldn't want to be accused of killing my bird.
right.
And then the dad acts like, "Wait, why are you being an asshole to me? You come back here." And it's like, you just told him to his face that he killed the bird and he's supposed to just stand there and take your abuse? This sequence is absurd
It's
and not in
so
a good way.
no. It is so bad it's funny though. I did laugh. I know it's not probably supposed to be a laughing moment to a degree, but it almost has to be. I almost kind of think when they're writing this, they had to have their idea that this was going to be a laughing scene.
I
Um,
I
I
feel like that's a lot of the movie, but I don't get it because, like,
right,
honestly, and I'll say this: almost all the stuff inside the house that they live in, the original Elm Street house, is fucking awful. Like,
yeah,
it is most of the stuff in the movie that doesn't work. All these ideas, like the thing with the bird, or with all the, it's the house is so hot. oh my god, somehow Freddy is turning the heat up in the house, and they keep making these illusions that Freddy actually was in that basement at one point.
Yeah, the
It,
vision's
it
there.
yeah, which but then the movie also tells you, well, actually, he was actually doing this out at this plant, like outside the town. But
Right,
the movie also keeps alluding to, but he actually might have been in the house. Like,
right.
it's very odd. And
Yeah,
again, it just makes the movie not really coherent.
right. I do find it funny, speaking of the house, I do find it funny that they don't even try to make the any part of the inside look like the nightmare house we were in
No,
before. Like, not even like an
no.
attempt, which is like they filmed this like a year later. So
Yeah.
unless they trashed the entire set, why did I mean they might have trashed the set 'cause they were just kind of thinking it would be anything more than what it was, but it just felt like such a different. The outside looks good enough that you can fake it. The inside is just so cramped and like laid out completely differently, and it's kind
You
of
know what
weird.
that reminds me of?
What?
Halloween 5.
Halloween 5? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
not
The
wrong.
gothic Michael Myers house, where it looks nothing like the original inside or out.
Yeah, yeah, you're
In
not
one of
wrong
the
there.
most bizarre changes in any movie, in any franchise ever, I can never get over the
That's
Michael
a
Myers
choice.
5 house.
That's a choice. That's definitely a choice. Uh, um, alright, now let's talk about the coach sequences there. What a weird decision to make this
All of
go
it's
this way.
weird.
All of it's weird. The S&M
Uh,
Club, the towel whipping death to the
well,
like
also just the way he weirdly gets off on like abusing young men.
right, right? It just feels I mean, I love the actor, like I said before, he's in a bunch of things like Stand By Me, Total Recall, Starship Troopers, Twins. He was like the assassin in Twins,
Yeah.
but it feels so weird. I mean, I guess it's just to have it is an 80s trope that the teacher there's a bully gym teacher type of character who gets on our male leads. Whatever. That's a trope, and they did go through that. But the way they go about it is just so overt at times that's a little creepy, a little off.
Well, and the thing is the movie also tells you, in like the kids kind of joke about it, but it's also clearly not a joke, right?
Right? Yeah. Right.
That
Yeah.
he's actually creepy and a sex pest.
Yeah.
And honestly, there's your dude who should be Freddy Krueger then in this. If that's how you're like, if Freddy's taking over any character in this movie, I know what they're going for with the Jesse thing in some capacity, but
Right.
actually I don't, because the movie never makes it the point that I should know. But like, you're trying to turn a teen kid into, a serial killer, fine, whatever. Like, I get it. But here's a dude who's actually weird and creepy and actually like strange. You could do something with that.
100% you could. 100% you could. Instead, they treat him like this like will one-off mini boss like a video game. He's like the mini boss that they have to get
Yeah.
by, and he gets killed. You're like, okay, we're done with him now. Um, I didn't love him. Didn't love him.
No, and I don't love that portion of the movie.
Yeah, me either. Me either. To be honest, there.
Not because it makes me uncomfortable, but
No,
I just once again, I think it's one of the things about the movie that I find it doesn't quite know what it's trying to do.
right,
And it comes off really strange. And to be frank, then there's the whole thing of once the coach is murdered or whatever, it just kind of goes away.
right. Yeah, that's like the weirdest part about it. Like they go to school the next day, and it's like, oh, he was. Not only is he dead, but like somebody got in there and slashed him up, and like it's mentioned, and then that's it.
Yeah.
Until he brings it up with Lisa later on. That's the only other time it's mentioned. It's like think about Scream. Kid was
Yeah.
killed like at a party off campus, and the place was like shut down and everything for like like it's so much different. This is I know it's the 80s versus the 90s as well, but still, this guy was killed in the school, and they don't
Yeah.
know who did it, and yet we're moving on.
No, it's weird and it doesn't really vibe with it, right? Because
Right?
even in the first movie, it felt like there was escalation to all the stuff that was happening.
Yeah.
And so if something happened, everyone was kind of aware and involved in some way. Like, it just doesn't really work here.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating because I hate doing the how I would change the thing or how I would
Yeah.
make something different and looking at things through a lens of now, but like I can't just give the movie a pass for being when it came out and they're just trying to capitalize on the original movie.
Right.
Like it's just not good storytelling. And for me, it's really aggravating to watch because I want to get more out of it. I want it to do something and it doesn't do anything. It just falls on its face again.
Well,
The
let's
sequence involving him dying is great,
yeah.
but like
Yeah. Let's just say honestly, I think the main thing about the film for me, the main problem I have with the film is the same problem I have with a lot of horror sequels. It's a quick, dirty attempt to cash in, and everything's rushed and trying to
yeah.
save a buck and trying to just make it back out to these. I mean, again, this is a year later. I mentioned the Robert Englund thing. They almost didn't pay Robert Englund to come back. What a mistake that would have been. And it just seems like the story's kind of quick and dirty. They don't really care. Let's just get it done. That's just a side character. That's just we're in that for the death. We'll throw in that kind of stuff. We don't need to worry about that. The story is with Jesse and Lisa potentially, but it just ends up being instead of taking your time telling a good story, it doesn't feel like that's the motivation. The motivation is let's get Freddy back up on screen, and we'll do it as quick as we can.
Yeah, but even then, I'd argue the movie doesn't do that great of a job at that either because Freddy's really not in this movie.
That is one of my biggest notes. Actually, I was going to build up to that one point, so I'm glad you bring it up now. It's fine.
Yeah.
I hated that. One of my biggest notes is that they permanently underutilized Robert Englund, and that might be because I think it feels like that was because they were initially going to go without him. It's like you wanted too much money, we're going to go without him. We can just have him be a monster like Michael and Jason, and we can just put him in just a little bit of the movie, and we can deal with this. And that doesn't work for a Nightmare movie, unfortunately, not nearly as well as the other ones. When you have Robert Englund, the guy whose physicality helps define a character, his like charisma can help define a character. When he's the best thing the movie's got, and he is by far the best thing this movie has, is Robert Englund.
Yeah.
And then you don't use him for like the first, like at least like this is a 90-minute movie, I think, or somewhere around there. And I gotta say, for like the first
7 minutes, it's like
first half of the movie, he is barely in it. Barely in it. And then like it's not he's
unless
not
you count his cameo as the bus driver.
yeah, there's that too. That's true. Once he comes out, it's better. But even then, like it feels like there's this big sequence. I'm gonna go into my other big issue with the film, to be honest with you, is the big coming out party, and is that Freddy makes it out of Jesse, and he's at the summer pool party, Lisa's pool party. And oh god, I have a big problem with this. And Wes Craven actually had a big problem with this as well. He mentioned that like he was talking about one of the problems he had with the script, and he quoted just to quote him. He said, "I also thought they brought Freddy too much into the realm of reality and put him in situations where he was diminished. You want Freddy to be always threatening and overpowering, but when he's running around a swimming pool with a bunch of teenagers who are all bigger than he is, he starts to look really silly." And he's absolutely right, because we remember from the last film when Freddy was brought into the real world, he had this like fight with Nancy, but it was obviously noted that he's weaker in the real world than he is in the dream world. So you're putting Freddy now in this real world situation with about 50 to 60 kids. And these 50, 60 kids, half of them are football players who are definitely bigger than him. They could have subdued him and taken him out, to be completely honest with you. It's just, it's not intimidating or scary as it needs to be.
It's not, and the rules also feel weird in this capacity because he's a lot more powerful in this, which I don't really understand. Because yeah, he comes out of Jesse, and now he's alive or whatever, but there's no world he should be as powerful as he is coming across. Like he's boiling water, he's able to make things explode, he walks through fences, he catches things on fire. Like it's very bizarre how he goes God mode very quickly.
Right, and
And
this is
I
what I
don't
mentioned
love
before
that.
was the idea. What's the problem with it is because this is what I meant before about it's so vague.
No,
Whether
right.
what's is this real world or is this dream world? I mean, it can't be that all these kids are dreaming, are they? Did he bring them? Like, if they found a way to bring all these kids in the dream world, this works to a degree. It works to a degree, but it doesn't feel like they're telling you that that's the case. It leaves you guessing about it and never really comes clear. And he's doing these weird God mode things in there, like he is in Dream World, but it makes it more confusing and distracting than anything else. And at the end of the day, you watch some of the shots, it's Freddy like throwing chairs around and just going to a bunch of people, and occasionally stabbing someone who gets too close to him. And it's like it does, like Wes Craven says, if he looks diminished in that time, whereas in the first film he was always this like monstrous kind of overtly intimidating creature in your dreams. And when he was brought out in the real world, he was still pretty monstrous, but it was definitely much more of a case of I'm in the real world, I'm a little more vulnerable, but I'm still intimidating, and it's not as silly. And that's where the film loses me a little bit. It becomes too silly.
No, he totally does in that capacity, and I think that's why the third act just doesn't really work in any way.
Right.
And I think that it sucks to say it this way. Honestly, the third act would be a lot better if Robert Englund wasn't even in it at that point. Because the best way to have done this would have honestly been for Jesse to have been overcome by Freddy, but he is Freddy in the real world. Like that should have been, and honestly, that's kind of what the movie actually says and
Wants to
hints at
happen.
up front,
Yeah.
and then doesn't do. Because when Freddy initially attacks Jesse in his dream, he goes, "You're the body, I'm the brain."
Right.
And like that alludes to me that he is going to take over Jesse's body. And he does a couple of times, but like imagine the party sequence a lot differently, right? If it's Jesse and everyone sees Jesse attacking Lisa and sees like there's something to be said about that, but it's now a different voice coming out of him. That's how you create fear on Elm Street again. Like there's a much better story beat there.
Like you could have done it, and let me take this back. You could still have had Robert Englund do it, because you could have easily had it where that was the story. The story was Freddy was taking over Jesse's body, but then visually we see Robert Englund as Freddy. Even though we know, like we could see, like it was only take with a couple of establishing shots, have the like, a point of view shot from the audience where you see Jesse. But then when it flips around, it's more from him. We see Robert Englund as Freddy. We see the metaphor there. It still works. You get to see Robert Englund, and yet the what they're hinting at a few times, like you said, with the whole "I'm the body, you're the body, I'm the brain." It works that way. And it comes across much clearer, much less confusing, much less distracting, and you're able to move the story forward.
Yeah, and I think that it's funny because the exactly what you're talking about is what I would have wanted from the third act of this, honestly. And that would have been more interesting. And it also plays into Lisa really begging him to like not hurt her and all of these things. Like, I don't know, man. Like this idea that when she's begging him, Jesse, if you're still in there, like you can come out to me, like that's all way better.
Yeah. If it's Jesse, right? If it's actually Jesse
Right.
in there, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. I fully agree. It's this weird thing going on there. And speaking of third acts, the whole power plant ending is just again bizarrely weird, with the Freddy
Yeah.
pets and the Freddy like disintegrating to love and her kissing Freddy, and that would solve that as well. The whole thing it just feels again odd. Like the Freddy pets, are they in the real world or are we in the dream world now? I don't know what we're doing here. Be more clearly defined, and again, I say that because I feel weird saying that because I liked it when Nightmare 1 was vague, but like I said, it's okay to be vague at first, but make that decision and commit to it at some point for the viewer, so the viewer can go, "Oh,
Well,
we're here."
you tend to figure out pretty early on when people are dreaming in these movies and when they're not, right?
Right. Most of the time
This
in this one.
movie doesn't really do that.
Yeah.
And the thing is again, because it's playing with so many ideas of everything being more reality based in like we're not really dealing with the dream world in a
Right.
lot of this movie, that we're supposed to believe that the dream world is bleeding into real life, but I don't think the movie makes it clear enough.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's a good apt description for the entire film. It doesn't make anything really clear enough. It's not worried about making everything clear enough. Sometimes it's okay to be a little vague. It's okay to have a little ambiguity in there. But if you're all ambiguity, you start losing the viewer because the viewer starts trying to figure it out too much, and then they're not watching your story. They're caught up in their own head trying to figure out what's going on, and that is a
So
detriment to the
Tenet.
film. Absolutely. to a degree.
A movie I
Absolutely.
love, by the way.
I do as well, but that was the struggle for a lot of people.
Yes.
Is they were trying to go, "What? I don't get what's going on." And they lost the story itself. This is why it deserves a second view. It really is. That kind of shows a little bit. This one won't see. This film does not get cleared up by second view. That's the difference. Tenet was more difficult to understand, but I think you could get there eventually once you get
Well,
there.
Tenet also is like a loop within a loop within a loop within a loop, as it
Right.
turns out, on top of it, which it's just so it's a great movie that has so much going on and is like so deeply ingrained in itself that more watches help you see more of what's going on.
Right.
And I
I
want you to know I ordered my hot sauce what is it, 10 minutes ago?
yeah. Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
um. All right. Let's talk about anything else that you wanted to throw out there. I have a few more things
Uh
I'd throw out there,
Look,
but
I'm going to say this too. I think that even though I clearly don't love the movie.
right.
I have a lot of feelings about. I think that you're right in some capacity that by being rushed, by being a movie that was done as fast as it was to capitalize on the success of the last one, it's actually not the worst of
Right.
that. And I think that that needs to be noted too. I don't even think this is the worst movie in the franchise,
Mm,
which is also fair. I think. I just wish that it was more. And I know that that's almost unfair to ask of it, considering what it was, the limitations that were put on it going into it. I understand all of that. And I understand that it's probably not fair to say that. But the truth of the matter is I want more from this movie. And because it doesn't deliver on that for me, I just don't gel with it as well as some of the others. It's not that it's a bad movie, it's just that it's not a particularly good movie either.
Or in some ways, it's not a very particularly memorable movie. In
Right.
terms of like we mentioned, like one of our big talks about Nightmare One was how many iconic scenes there were, how many iconic bits of like things that live in the horror lexicon. What is in this one? Not a whole lot. And I'm not saying it's not well done at times, but there's not much that has survived. I think the only thing that really has survived for me, like as far as like when I'm not watching the movie, I'm just thinking about the Freddy franchise, is Freddy's line at the pool party when he sits there, looks at them all, and goes, "You are all my children now." Great line, great
Yes.
delivery, great moment. Pretty iconic overall. However, the rest of it just kind of gets thrown by the wayside. There's nothing really specifically good about it. But any of the shots that like are memorable, I'm saying. Um, I may be wrong. So maybe your miles may vary on that. But
I think that there's some good imagery in this. I
yeah,
think the Freddy walking out of the mist and
yeah,
attacking the coach is fantastic. I actually think that entire sequence, honestly, is really well established, really well put together. You're kind of waiting for weird stuff to happen, but it's also downplayed and a little comical when everything in the office starts attacking him. Like once the rope gets involved, it's kind of fun and like it feels different. But when it's like balls bouncing off of him and stuff, it's kind of dumb.
right. Especially because of how he reacts to it. He's kind of like,
Yeah,
"Oh, this is weird." like you
yeah,
freaked out when this is happening at this point, wouldn't you? Like it's a little strange. I will give you the imagery part. There's actually one other image that really stuck with me through all the years. When Freddy's trying to come out of Jesse, you see
yes,
Freddy's eye in his throat, the open mouth, whatever. You see him in the
yeah.
body. That's a great image for it. That's a great what they're going for. I love that bit, to be honest with
See,
you.
that one's great. I think that there's more to this movie that could have been that is very good to great had it been in a good movie. The problem is that what
Yeah,
could have been good or great is just little it's little grasps of air for greatness that never comes.
yeah,
And that's such a bummer because
right.
again, you've got a great Robert Englund performance. Mark Patton's Jesse is actually a very likable character that I don't think gets enough love in the pantheon of the slasher final girls.
Nope.
But the characters around him aren't interesting. You do a lot of trying to chase the original movie while also trying to distance yourself from the original movie, which is very confusing. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Either lean on the original or don't. Like,
Right.
don't play this half in, half out game.
Right.
it just doesn't quite come together. It
Right.
doesn't quite work. And that sucks. And it's kind of a bummer because there are, again, like, there's moments of little brilliance. Like, even in the opening, the imagery of the bus and like the ground falling out from underneath the bus, like, that's great horror
Yeah.
imagery.
Yeah.
Like, it's fantastic. All that stuff in that initial dream sequence is great. And it is later diminished by doing it again at the end of the movie.
Agreed. Very much so agreed. Um, I would also throw out there a few other things I did like. I like the line delivery for "Shut up, Grady."
Mhm.
Made me
Mhm.
laugh out. It literally made me laugh out loud. I loved that bit. Um, I do also want to throw out there specifically. I mentioned this in a text here. I definitely want to get this out here before we wrap things up. Even though I don't love the film tonally, I don't love what the film did on a lot of levels for various reasons. I will say that this, what the best thing this film has to do as far as the legacy of the franchise goes, it lets and I'm talking about the tone specifically. It really lets Robert England develop Freddy to be more of what Freddy Krueger is. The Freddy Krueger that we know
Yes.
and love and icon, it does not exist without him leaving the darkness of the first one behind and getting a little silly in this one. Not so much. By the time we get to three, it's a little bit of a combination of tone. Like it's three goes back to the tone of the first one, dark wise, but Freddy stays with this kind of sillier, campier side of him. And it's a great combination. Now, of course, it's not always matched in every movie. Sometimes Freddy gets a little too silly at times. As we'll find out eventually in Freddy's Dead, there's moments where he's just really too silly. But the Freddy that we know and love, we think about Freddy Krueger, it is the wisecracking uh, killer with great effects and everything else. And Freddy gets that development a little bit here, and I think it's specifically because of the tone that they're creating with this film. So
100%.
absolutely something. So
Yeah.
if nothing else, it does well for that.
No, and that's the one thing I think that we can credit the franchise moving forward from,
Right.
in this movie in particular, is that had that not happened, this would honestly feel like such a weird moment for this franchise. I mean, we have to remember that, like, they followed it up, and this movie's reception almost made the third movie never happen. Like,
Hmm.
and that was just off the reception. It still managed to make money. Like, it was made for $3 million. It made $30 million.
Yeah.
You made 10 times what it cost to make it. And even then, the studio was like, we don't know if we should do another one. And
Right.
that's why they pumped the brakes and they ended up waiting like a couple of years instead
Just
of
two.
just rushing into it.
And I think, and honestly, I think because we mentioned before, New Line Cinema is the house that Freddie built. That's one of the main reasons they did come back to it because New Line still wasn't fully developed to be what New Line
Yeah.
became. So they're like, well, this is our big hit. Nightmare was our big hit that did everything. Yeah, the second one wasn't as successful, but I think if we get Craven back, we can do a third one and Freddy can still shine. And so I think that's what ended up luckily working out for us. Because you're right, this film could have tanked everything. Completely honestly,
Yeah.
it could have tanked everything. Um, at the end, we're going to get into our ratings, but I will say, last thing I definitely want to say about it is that I've mentioned it a few times. I just want to say definitively again, I almost would like to have seen this film done outside of the Freddy verse. Had it been a standalone possession movie not involving Freddy Krueger, I think it might have been a little more well received, and not have to depend on it being like a cult classic for various reasons, and not get some of the hate it gets because of being such an opposite of the first Freddy film.
Yeah.
But it is what it
It's
is.
just the unfortunate reality, though, when you come off of a movie like that. Like, it
Mhm.
sucks to say because, again, I mean, look, if you've listened to this show long enough and listened to us talk about movies long enough, there are movies that we are much harder on that we don't
Oh
even
yeah,
enjoy talking about. There's still stuff to talk about in this. I think it creates a lot of good conversation. No matter what side of this you fall on, I think this movie at least is worth talking about. And I think that ultimately is the biggest compliment I can give it at the end of the
yeah,
day. Like, look, I may not love the movie, you may not love the movie, but we know plenty of people who probably do love
Yeah.
this movie. There's a reason it has the cult following that it has. And while not everything might work for us in some regard, if it works for you and you enjoy it, I think that's the best part about it. And I
Yeah.
think that if we can walk away from one thing tonight, this movie, here we are, almost exactly 40 years later,
Yeah.
talking about it. There's still conversation to be had about it, why it works, why it doesn't, the things that it was doing, how progressive it was for what it was. I think that matters.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately it doesn't matter if we don't love the movie because we're still here talking about it. And I
Right.
think that's really cool.
I do too. I definitely do too. PJ, on a scale of 1 to 11, because you always turn things up to 11 here on PLD Projects, what do you rank this movie? What do you give this movie?
I'm going to go ahead and give this guy a 6.
A 6. I would say,
It's like right in the middle for me.
yeah, I almost want to give it a 6 too. But I actually do it first. 'Cause I'm still trying to figure it out in my head. And I still go back to like, if this was a standalone film, I might give it like a 7.
Yeah.
As a Freddy movie, I almost want to give it a 5 because it feels a little weird that way. So I think I will join you with a 6, and I'll like split that difference in the middle and go give it a
Yeah.
6.
Yeah. I think that's the right move for this movie because, again, I don't think it's
Yeah.
egregiously bad. I think that there's many worse
No.
sequels in franchises. I think there's worse movies in this franchise in particular. So I'm not gonna nail this one with like some mediocre rating. I think it's a just very middle of the road film,
It
which
is.
again, coming off the original, maybe not great, but that's what it is. And what are you gonna do?
I think that's the big thing to take away from this film. Like the first one is such an iconic film. The third one is such a well-loved film. It's almost more interesting and engaging and important to compare Friday Nightmare 2 with like Nightmare 5 and 6, maybe even 4, 5, and 6, and see where
Yeah.
it ranks amongst those. That's what I'm kind of interested to say at this point. But yeah, that'll do it for us, folks. PJ's got to get packed. He's got to get going to Walt Disney. So have a good time
I'm
there,
already
my
there. What are
friend.
you talking about?
Oh, that's right. You're already there. You're already having a great time,
I'm
man.
already there.
That's true.
I do want to take a moment though, like all shits and giggles and everything else aside, if you follow me on social media, I know that you guys have seen over the last couple of weeks, it's been very, very difficult. My partner and I lost our corgi very,
Mm,
very suddenly, very shockingly. Like it was not a thing that we woke up one morning and we had a dog and then we didn't. And it's been really difficult. I miss Mabel a lot, but there's been a lot of you who watch the show who have listened or who have reached out, and I just wanted to say thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, from MJ's heart. Like it really matters. So thank you guys. Like it's been really difficult. We miss her a lot, but you guys are amazing, and I really appreciate your kind words and everything else. It sucks, and I miss
yeah.
her a lot, and I just really appreciate you guys. It's a really difficult time, and so thank you. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. We love Mabel here as well. And we're sad for you, and we wish you well on that for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of social media, where can all the folks find you and go from there?
You guys can find me at PJ underscore Campbell, pretty much where all social medias are sold. I'm always around. So, find me there,
There you go.
hanging out with this guy, or at Walt Disney World, as it turns out,
Fair
because
enough.
I seem to be there pretty frequently.
I wish I was there. You can find
Me
me at
too.
Paul. Sugar Denizio on the old Twitter's here and on social media. You can find me on this all over this channel, of course. My name is on the tin, as Matty Gunner likes to say. I have a weekly show with Matty Gunner doing Star Wars podcast, Holy Snokes, with the upcoming Skeleton Crew coming. Can't wait for that. I do a bi-weekly podcast with Lego, the aforementioned Lego that we mentioned earlier. We talk about V, the franchise that she is hate watching at this point with the 2009 reboot, but it's okay. We'll get through it. Um, and then I do a weekly podcast on Queen. I go through the entirety of the Queen catalog song by song. It's a lot of fun to do that as well. If you like this, hit subscribe, hit that like, leave comments, leave ratings, talk to us. Let us know what you think. Let us know how you feel about this film. If you want to help us even
Honestly, and
further,
if you want to tell us that we're wrong,
go
tell
ahead.
us that we're wrong. Like we like talking to you guys. It's
Yeah,
nice to actually conversate with you guys. Like it's a good thing. Please comment below. Tell us why we're wrong. Like
yeah,
I would love to hear it. Legitimately.
absolutely. Because there are lovers of like there are people out there who love this more than the first film, and God bless them. If that it is the film that they reach for, I have no problem with that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm gonna
tell me
say
why.
that real fast
Tell me
before we get
why.
out of here.
Yeah,
You and your movie opinions are you and your movie opinions, and it's beautiful, and you should always feel that way. And I always want people to remember like how important that actually is.
yeah.
Um, it doesn't matter if we don't like the movie. It
Hmm.
really doesn't. It doesn't matter if we were hard on the movie. We just hope that you guys got to listen to a fun conversation and
Yeah,
we got to get our points across. We're not always great at it. We are two mediocre men. That's the joke of the show is that it's two mediocre white dudes on film. But like the truth of the matter is we jumble our words, we do the whole thing, but we still try to come at this in a way where we talk about this stuff in a very real way. Like it matters to us. And
right.
if as long as you are happy with and feel confident in your opinion, who cares what we think? And I think that's
Absolutely.
beautiful. And that's why the conversation is so much fun. So, again, let us know if you think
Yeah,
we're like the most wrong people on the planet. Let us know why, because I would love to hear why you guys love the movie. Because your guys' love for a thing makes me love a thing more. Because I know
it's
when
true.
people really enjoy a thing, it's really infectious and it actually makes it better.
Yeah, there's times I've actually wanted to rewatch a movie because someone really loved it so much. I'm like, really? And they tell me about it. I go, okay, yeah, I gotta look at it
You
again through
you
different
don't have to
eyes.
call me out like that, but it's cool because I know that you do that literally all the time in half of our
That's
conversations.
true. That's
Because
very
I
true.
tend to look at things through a very different lens than most people. Like there's a reason I'm known for being stupidly positive, but it's not even about being positive. It's about just taking the movies for what they are. And I think that ultimately like that's the thing. It's a little different with a show like this where we break things down and like we're deep diving into it, but just for general enjoyment, like just take a thing as it is. Like don't put more on it than it needs to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you want to support further, we do have Patreon, patreon.com/PLD Projects. Great crew is Austin Goodell, Brandon Buckingham, etc. But if not, get it. I totally get it. It's hard times, but you can share. You can like help us fight the almighty algorithm. Well, that'll do it for us of this time. We will be back in 2 weeks to talk about one of my favorite movies in the franchise, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 3, Dream Warriors, Return of Wes
Dream
Craven.
Warriors.
Docking, yes. Uh, Wes Craven coming back as a writer, at least, so it does help out that way. And Nancy Langenkamp also makes her glorious return. Definitely be there for that.
And demise.
And demise. That's true. Spoiler. All right.
Spoiler alert for the almost 40-year-old movie.
Exactly. All right. Take care. We'll see you next
Catch
time,
you on the
people.
next one.